across the crowded Harbor Row brunch spot. My sister laughed at my shoes. "Looks like they're from the clearance rack," she said. She didn't know the check placed on our table belonged to a subsidiary of the company I control. "Next week, I sign the monthly payroll, and that signature will be the final line item for her years of lies and flattery." I said nothing at the table. My response would come later, under the subject line, "Payroll approval." My name is Mara Ellison. I am 32 years old, and I believe in punctuality as a form of precision. The Wisteria, a brunch spot in Clearhaven's glossiest waterfront district, was my choice. Its aesthetic is a carefully curated form of effortless chic, whitewashed brick walls that catch the late morning sun, hanging ferns that cast soft, dappled shadows, and the low, pleasant hum of a clientele that mistakes wealth for taste. I arrived at 11 o'clock sharp. The hostess, a young woman with a meticulously practiced smile, led me to a small table for two by the floor-to-ceiling windows. The sunlight was brilliant, almost sterile, as it sliced through my glass of water, shattering into 1,000 tiny rainbows on the polished concrete floor. It reflected off the silver tines of my fork and the smooth, cool surface of the marble tabletop. I ordered a black coffee and waited, observing the quiet mechanics of the restaurant, the rhythmic clink of cutlery against ceramic, the gentle hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of conversations that were more performance than communication. Every sound was crisp, every surface clean. It was a place built on control, which is why I chose it. At 11:17, Sloane made her entrance. My sister, at 28, does not simply arrive. She materializes, usually with an entourage that orbits her like small, brightly colored moons. Today there were two of them, women whose faces I recognized from the endless scroll of their social media feeds, their smiles as bright and vacant as their online personas. Sloane swept through the restaurant, her laughter a little too loud, her movements a little too broad, designed to draw the eye. She wore a silk dress the color of a sunset, a garment that probably cost more than my monthly utilities, and heels that clicked an aggressive staccato against the floor. She did not apologize for her tardiness. Punctuality, to Sloane, is a concept for people who have somewhere they are required to be. She and her friends slid into the chairs around my small table, instantly overwhelming its carefully constructed serenity, the air filled with the scent of their competing perfumes. "Mara, darling," Sloane said, her voice dripping with the kind of condescending affection she had perfected since childhood. Her eyes, however, bypassed my face and went straight to my feet, tucked neatly under the table. A slow smirk spread across her perfectly painted lips. "Oh, honey, are those comfortable?" She was looking at my loafers. They were simple, well-made, Italian leather, designed for walking on city streets, not for posing. They were practical, durable, and understated. To me, they were an asset. To her, they were a punchline. "Accountant chic," she declared to her friends, who tittered on cue. My sister, the queen of the sensible shoe. I didn't respond. I simply took a sip of my coffee, the ceramic warm against my lips. The bitterness of the brew was a clean, grounding sensation. I watched her, cataloging the gesture, the slight tilt of her head, the way her eyes crinkled with manufactured mirth, the casual cruelty of the dismissal. It was all data. A waiter appeared, his professionalism a thin veneer over his obvious annoyance at the disruption. Sloane waved a dismissive hand at the menu. "We'll start with a bottle of the Veuve, and I'll have the lobster Benedict with extra hollandaise, and a side of the truffle fries." She looked at her friends. "Get whatever you want. My treat." Then her gaze flickered to me, a glint of challenge in her eyes. "Unless you're paying, Mara, you probably have a coupon, right?" "Order what you like, Sloane," I said, my voice even. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper meant for the whole table to hear. "You know, it's funny. People with real money, they just don't dress like that." She made a vague gesture in my direction. It wasn't an insult so much as a diagnosis. delivered with the unshakable confidence of someone who has never had to earn the money she spends. Her friends nodded sagely, their eyes appraising my simple black blazer and silk shell top as if they were artifacts from a lost, unfashionable civilization. My gaze drifted past her, to the bar. I watched a busboy load a rack of glasses and, next to him, the hostess swiped a credit card through the point-of-sale terminal. The machine whirred, a soft, mechanical sound, and spat out a long, thin receipt. For a fraction of a second, before the hostess tore it off, I could read the header printed in a faint dot matrix font. Breyer and Wren Hospitality Group, it said, and just below it, a smaller, almost unreadable line, a Larkspur Holdings Company. Larkspur Holdings, my company. The wisteria was just one of dozens of properties under the Breyer and Wren umbrella, which was, in turn, the third and most recent acquisition I had made. Sloane was performing her little theater of superiority in a room where I owned the very chairs she was sitting on. As if on cue, a subtle vibration emanated from my pocket. I slipped my phone out and placed it face down on the table. The screen lit up for a moment, illuminating the white marble from beneath. I didn't need to see the notification to know what it said. It was a calendar alert, set for the same time every month. Reminder, payroll sign-off, Friday, 9 a.m. This Friday, in less than 48 hours. Anyway, Sloane was saying, launching into a story I knew was either heavily embellished or an outright fabrication. My boss is just obsessed with me. He literally said the other day that the social media team would fall apart without me. The new senior lead position is practically mine. He said my engagement numbers are unprecedented. One of her friends gasped with delight. "Sloane, that's amazing! You deserve it!" I listened, my focus absolute. I recorded every word, every boastful inflection. I was no longer a sister at a brunch table. I was an auditor, and this was an unscheduled deposition. Her boss, a man I had hired 6 months ago, had in fact flagged her department for an internal review due to budgetary anomalies and metrics that seemed too good to be true. Unprecedented was one word for it. Statistically improbable was another, arrogance. I have found, often cosigns its own confession. Sloane was so busy building her personal brand that she failed to notice she was simultaneously documenting her own fraud. The champagne arrived. The waiter popped the cork with a soft thud. The sound absorbed by the ambient noise of the room. He poured 4 glasses. Sloane raised hers, the tiny bubbles catching the light. "To big promotions and even bigger paychecks," she toasted, her eyes meeting mine over the rim of her glass. I raised my water. "To accountability," I said softly. She didn't catch the nuance. She never did. The meal progressed as a showcase for Sloane's success. She talked about brand collaborations, influencer junkets, and the sheer incompetence of everyone else on her team. Her friends listened with rapt attention, occasionally interjecting with their own stories of online triumphs. I was a silent observer, a ghost at their feast. I ate my salad, the crispness of the lettuce a sharp contrast to the syrupy sweetness of their conversation. When the performance finally wound down, the manager himself brought the bill, presenting it in a small leather folio. He placed it in the center of the table. Sloane made no move to take it. Her earlier offer of my treat had evaporated, as it always did. All eyes turned to me. I didn't hesitate. I opened the folio, glanced at the total, and slid my corporate card from my wallet. It was a plain black card with no embossed numbers, only my name, Mara Ellison. As the waiter took it, he glanced down at the name and then back at me. A flicker of professional recognition crossed his face. He had seen the name on memos, on reservation blocks. He didn't know the whole story, but he knew enough. "Thank you, Ms. Ellison," he said, his voice a respectful murmur. Sloane and her friends were too busy scrolling through their phones to notice the shift in his tone. They missed the subtle deference, the quiet acknowledgement of a hierarchy they couldn't see. They saw only the sensible shoes and the plain blazer, and drew their simple, incorrect conclusions. I signed the slip, adding a generous tip. The staff shouldn't have to pay for my sister's ego. and stood up. "I have a call to get to," I said. It wasn't a lie. My afternoon was scheduled with back-to-back meetings with legal and finance. Sloane looked up, momentarily distracted from her screen. "Already? The party's just getting started." "Some of us have work to do," I replied, my tone neutral. I walked away without looking back. The automatic glass doors slid open, and a gust of cool autumn air hit me. It was sharp and clean, clearing my head of the cloying atmosphere of the restaurant. The wind whipped a strand of hair across my face, and I pushed it back, my movements calm and deliberate. The light was different out here, less forgiving. The polished illusion of the wisteria gave way to the unvarnished reality of the city. I stood on the pavement for a moment, the sounds of traffic and distant sirens washing over me. Everything was in motion. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The brunch, the insult, the lies, the bill. They were no longer just a series of unpleasant moments. They were exhibits, A, B, C, and D, and Friday, at 9 a.m, I would present my closing argument, not in a courtroom, but in a quiet office, with a single, definitive click of a button. All the pieces were now in their proper places on the board, in my mother's house, in a silver frame on the mantelpiece. There is a photograph of our family. It was taken about 10 years ago, on a sunny afternoon in our backyard. In it, we are the very picture of suburban grace. My father was already gone by then, but his absence is a quiet ache, not a gaping wound. My mother, her face soft and optimistic, has her arms around both of her daughters. Sloane, a firecracker at 18, is beaming, her head thrown back in a laugh that looks artfully candid. And then there is me, a serious-faced 22-year-old with a small, polite smile that doesn't quite reach my eyes. A calligrapher once inscribed a mat for the frame with our family's unofficial motto. The Ellisons, hardworking, hospitable, polite. It sits there as a testament to a truth we never quite lived up to. We were polite, certainly, but hardworking and hospitable were qualities selectively applied. After my father passed away, the delicate balance of our household shifted entirely onto one axis. Sloane, my mother, a piano teacher who saw the world in terms of performance and applause, appointed Sloane the family's designated star. Sloane had the charisma, the looks, the effortless charm that my mother equated with success. She was the melody of the family. I was the quiet, rhythmic tapping of the metronome in the background. Necessary but uncelebrated. My mother would say, "Listen to Sloane tell the story. She makes it so much more exciting." Or, "Sloane has such a gift for making people feel special." What she meant was that Sloane had a gift for making herself the center of attention. While Sloane was rehearsing for the school play or planning a social event that required a new dress, I was working. I bussed tables at a diner throughout high school and took a work-study job in the university's finance department to pay for my textbooks. I was a ghost in our own family narrative. My straight A's in economics, my Dean's List certificates, my acceptance into a competitive finance program. These were achievements that were acknowledged with a distracted nod. They were quiet, paper-based victories. They were, as my mother once gently explained, hard to show off at a dinner party. A good report card couldn't compete with a homecoming queen sash. Sloane, naturally, majored in communications. Her coursework seemed to consist of learning how to build a personal brand, a skill she had been honing since birth. She moved to the city after graduation with 2 suitcases and a meticulously curated social media presence. Her narrative was compelling. I'll give her that. The plucky small-town girl making her way in the big city, armed with nothing but a killer smile and an eye for aesthetics. Her life was a performance piece, lived through the lens of her phone. Every brunch was a photo shoot, every outfit a statement, every minor inconvenience a dramatic, multi-part story for her followers. At home during the holidays, our family's energy was consumed by her digital life. Dinners were interrupted for her to catch the perfect lighting for a selfie. Conversations would halt so we could all admire a particularly witty caption that had garnered hundreds of likes. My own career was progressing in the opposite direction. I was moving through the world of private equity, a realm of spreadsheets, NDAs, and quiet, ruthless calculations. My victories were celebrated in confidential emails and seven-figure wire transfers, not with emojis and celebratory hashtags. When I closed my first major deal, I called my mother to tell her the news. After I briefly explained the complex leveraging strategy I had used, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Well, that's nice, dear," she finally said. "Did I tell you Sloan was featured on a local fashion blogger's top 10 list?" There was a time when the disparity stung. I would feel a hot flash of resentment, a childish urge to scream. "Look at me. What I am building is real. It has weight. It is not a filtered picture of a sunset." But that frustration was inefficient. It yielded no return. One evening, after another holiday dinner dominated by a breathless, exaggerated account of Sloane's latest social triumph, my mother followed me into the kitchen. She placed a hand on my arm, her expression a mixture of love and concern. "Mara, you're just so serious all the time," she said, her voice soft. "You need to lighten up. Your sister, she needs the stage. She shines there. Let her have it." It was meant as a piece of gentle, motherly advice, but what I heard was a fundamental misunderstanding of who I was. And in that moment, something inside me settled. She was right. Sloane needed the stage, the lights, the applause. I did not. I operated in the quiet, shadowed space backstage, where the real machinery was controlled. So I let her have the stage, and I learned to love the silence. The silence was where I could think, where I could strategize, where I could build. While they were distracted by the performance, I was acquiring the theater. The resentment was replaced by a cold, clear focus. I decided to let my work speak for itself. Even if I was the only one listening, I learned to let my silence accrue compound interest. 2 years ago, I made my first major independent move. I formed Larkspur Holdings, a private equity firm with a focus on undervalued hospitality and consumer goods brands. For the sake of anonymity, I used a legal name, Lark Rowan. On the initial incorporation documents, it afforded me a level of distance, allowing my reputation to be built on results, not on my family name or my gender. I hired a seasoned CEO to be the public face of the company, while I remained the managing member, the final authority on all major capital expenditures. I worked from a minimalist, unbranded office downtown, a quiet sanctuary of glass and steel where the only thing that mattered was the bottom line. Breyer and Wren Hospitality Group was our third and largest acquisition. It was a portfolio of promising local brands, restaurants, cafes, boutique hotels that had potential but lacked centralized management and capital. I saw the value hidden beneath their inefficient operations. I saw a machine that could be tuned for maximum performance. About a year ago, Sloane called me, her voice buzzing with excitement. "Oh my God, Mara, you are not going to believe this. I've been headhunted." I was in the middle of reviewing a quarterly report, but I put it aside. "Oh," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Yes, this adorable chain of coffee shops. They're called Juniper and Slate. They reached out to me personally. The recruiter said my profile was exactly what they were looking for to elevate their brand. They're creating a social media lead position just for me." I felt a strange, cold stillness spread through me. Juniper and Slate was one of Breyer and Wren's flagship brands. I had personally signed off on the budget for a massive digital marketing recruitment drive 3 weeks prior. The personal outreach she had received was part of an automated email campaign sent to over 5,000 influencers and marketing professionals in the region. She hadn't been headhunted. She had been scraped from a list. "That's wonderful news, Sloane," I said. The line item for that recruitment campaign, for her salary, for the very laptop she would be issued, had passed across my desk. I had approved it. That weekend, my mother insisted on a celebration dinner. She had a cake made with "Congratulations, Sloane," written in pink icing. Sloane held court at the dining room table, regaling us with a highly fictionalized account of her recruitment. In her version, the CEO of Juniper and Slate had seen her Instagram feed and had personally demanded his HR department find her. My mother and aunts listened, their faces glowing with pride. Our little star was finally getting the recognition she deserved. "Isn't it marvelous, Mara?" my mother said, turning to me. "Our Sloan, a corporate powerhouse." I looked at my sister, who was taking a picture of the cake, no doubt already composing a caption about her meteoric rise. A powerhouse, yes, but a powerhouse running on a generator that she didn't know I owned. I smiled. A real smile this time. It was the calm, satisfied smile of an investor watching a long-term strategy begin to mature. I stood up and went to the kitchen. "I'll get the tea," I said, and as I poured the hot water over the tea leaves, watching them swirl and expand behind the clear glass of the pot, I felt a sense of profound, unshakable peace. The stage was set. All I had to do was wait for the play to run its course. 2 years ago, Larkspur Holdings was nothing more than a legal framework, a series of documents I filed myself under the name Lark Rowan. The name was a deliberate construct, a shield, Rowan, for the tree, a symbol of protection and vision, Lark, for the bird that sings at dawn, heralding a new day. It sounded less like a person and more like an institution, which was precisely the point. Anonymity in the world of private equity is not a preference. It is a strategic asset. It allows you to move without creating ripples, to acquire assets based on their intrinsic value rather than the perceived threat of a known competitor. Larkspur was my instrument, designed to identify and absorb underperforming but fundamentally sound businesses in the food and beverage sector. My approach was not revolutionary. It was simply methodical. I raised capital not from loud venture capitalists, but from quiet family offices and private trusts, investors who valued discretion and steady, long-term growth over flashy, high-risk gambles. They didn't need to see my face. They only needed to see the returns. Our first 2 acquisitions were small, tidy affairs, a regional coffee roaster and a small chain of artisanal bakeries. They were profitable, low risk, and allowed me to test and refine my operational playbook. The Breyer and Wren Hospitality Group was the 3rd deal, and it was an order of magnitude more complex. It wasn't a single entity but a constellation of local brands, restaurants like the Wisteria, cafes like Juniper and Slate, and a handful of boutique hotels. They were beloved by their clientele, but mismanaged at the corporate level, bleeding cash through redundant administrative roles and inefficient supply chains. During the due diligence process, I saw a dozen disparate budgets where there should have been one, marketing efforts that competed against each other, and a complete lack of scaled purchasing power. It was a mess, but it was a beautiful mess, full of potential energy waiting to be converted into kinetic growth. The acquisition was executed quietly, a simple announcement of a merger that went largely unnoticed by the public. The existing brand names remained, but the ownership structure was now a clean, direct line to Larkspur Holdings. My official title is Managing Member. It is a deliberately vague designation that confers ultimate authority without the public-facing responsibilities of a CEO. I hired a very capable, very visible chief executive, a man named Robert Sterling, to handle the day-to-day operations and the public relations. He reports to me, the board, composed of representatives from my key investors and myself, convenes quarterly. My role is to set the overarching strategy, approve major capital allocations, and protect the investment. I am not involved in hiring junior staff or deciding on the daily specials at the Wisteria. I operate at 30,000 feet, observing the weather patterns, not the individual clouds. However, there is one critical function that remains firmly within my control. A clause in our operating agreement, under board delegation protocols, stipulates that final authorization for certain significant expenditures, corporate-level vendor contracts, capital improvements over a certain threshold, and the consolidated monthly payroll for the entire holding company requires my signature. It is a standard fail-safe, a final check and balance designed to be reviewed during audits. It means that once a month, the financial lifeblood of every single employee, from Robert Sterling down to the dishwashers, flows through my office for approval. My digital signature is the final gate. Control, for me, is not about micromanagement. It is about creating systems that alert you to anomalies so that you can apply pressure only where it is needed. Upon acquiring Breyer and Wren, I had our tech team integrate a new analytics dashboard across all subsidiaries. Within it, I personally configured a series of automated alerts. An alert would trigger if a subsidiary's operational costs deviated by more than 15% from the projected quarterly budget. Another would flag any new vendor contract exceeding $20,000 that had not gone through the standard procurement process. And most importantly, I set a specific alert for marketing expenditures, particularly in the nebulous category of influencer and social media outreach. This alert was more sensitive, set to trigger at a 10% variance, with a secondary flag if more than 2 new vendors were onboarded in this category within a single 30-day period. For 6 months, the system was quiet. Then, last quarter, an alert fired. The source was Juniper and Slate. Their social media budget, which fell under my sister's purview, had swelled by nearly 30%. Simultaneously, a secondary flag was raised. 3 new influencer marketing agencies had been added to the vendor list in the same month. The amount was not catastrophic, not enough to threaten the company's bottom line, but it was a deviation. It was a signal in the noise. I did not act immediately. I simply began to pull the files. The first thing I examined were the new vendor contracts. They arrived in my secure digital Dropbox as 3 separate PDFs. They were for 3 different agencies: Golden Hour Media, Ascend Digital, and Cityscape Creative. The names were generic, but the documents themselves were strangely familiar. The formatting was identical. The font, Garamond, the boilerplate legal language in Section 4B, regarding termination for cause, was word for word the same across all 3. Even a subtle grammatical error, using its instead of its in the confidentiality clause, was replicated in each document. The only differences were the company names at the top and the banking information at the bottom. It was sloppy. It was the work of someone who assumed no one would ever read the fine print. My next step was to discreetly task our internal audit department with a performance review of Juniper and Slate's recent social media campaigns. I didn't mention my sister's name. I framed it as a routine check on marketing ROI. The report came back a week later, and it was damning. The auditors, a team of emotionless data analysts, found that the traffic spikes from recent campaigns were almost entirely composed of low-quality users. The click-through rates, CTR, that Sloan had been celebrating in her internal reports were, as the lead auditor dryly noted, so far outside industry benchmarks as to be considered statistically impossible. The traffic came from click farms in Southeast Asia. The followers gained were bot accounts, and the impressions were generated by servers, not human eyes. It was a phantom success, a beautiful, elaborate fiction bought and paid for with company money. The pieces were now in place: the identical contracts, the fraudulent traffic, the inflated budget. It was a classic, almost amateurish case of vendor fraud, likely involving kickbacks. Sloan was either breathtakingly incompetent or knowingly complicit. Given her boasts at Brunch, I was leaning toward the latter. She wasn't just doing a poor job, she was creating a false narrative of her own success and using my company's resources to fund it. My final move was a quiet one. I sent a 1-line email to the head of accounts payable. Effective immediately, please segregate all invoices and payment requests originating from the Juniper and Slate social media team for a separate, manual review. Do not process them until you receive my direct, personal authorization. And then, I waited. I did not call my mother. I did not confront my sister. I did not alert the CEO. An emotional response would have been a tactical error. The system I had built was working perfectly. It had flagged the problem, provided the evidence, and given me the mechanism of control. The payroll was on Friday. All her fabricated metrics, all her boasts, all her lies would ultimately lead to a single administrative process, a process that terminated on my screen. Waiting for a single click. I let the days pass. I took my meetings. I reviewed my other investments. I gave her the space and the time to become so comfortable in her deception that she would never see the meticulously constructed, procedurally sound reality that was about to be brought to bear. Patience, in my world, is not a virtue. It is the most powerful form of leverage, and it accrues the highest rate of interest. The days following the brunch at the wisteria became a quiet, intense period of data collation. My role shifted from passive observer to active investigator. The evidence, I found, was not difficult to uncover. Sloane had been so confident in her deception, so assured that no one was watching, that she had left a trail of digital breadcrumbs. My job was simply to collect them into a single, coherent file. Timestamp: Monday, 10:32 a.m. Source: internal Slack channel. Juniper Slate Marketing. A new message from Sloane appears, highlighted in bold. It is accompanied by a barrage of celebratory rocket ship and clapping emojis from her team members. Sloane Ellison. Boom! Just pulled the preliminary numbers for the Autumn Glow campaign. We've officially broken 5 million impressions across all platforms. Insane numbers. Team, we are absolutely crushing it. Time to start thinking about that holiday bonus. I stared at the message on my monitor. 5 million impressions. A number designed to sound impressive to those who don't understand what it means. It's a vanity metric of the highest order, easily bought and just as easily faked. I scrolled through the thread. Not a single person asked for a source. No one requested a link to the analytics dashboard. Her statement was accepted as fact. Her confidence the only verification required. I took a screenshot and saved it. Exhibit A. Timestamp: Monday, 2:15 p.m. Source: Vendor Management Portal. I pulled the 3 most recent campaign performance reports submitted by Sloane's new agencies: Golden Hour Media, Ascend Digital, and Cityscape Creative. I opened the PDFs in 3 adjacent windows on my screen. The vendor logos at the top of each document were different, each one a slick, generic piece of corporate branding, but the rest of the documents were identical, not similar. Identical. They used the same template, the same version of Garamond for the body text, the same precise hexadecimal code for the green used in their bar charts. On page 2 of each report, in the executive summary, the same spelling error appeared. This campaign generated significant brand awareness. Campaign: a careless mistake, forgivable once, but for 3 separate professional agencies to make the identical error in the identical spot was not a coincidence. It was a copy-paste job, a lazy one. I saved all 3 files. Exhibit B. Timestamp: Tuesday, 9:40 a.m. Source: Accounts Payable Invoices. The request from my AP department had yielded a folder of pending invoices from Sloane's team. I clicked through them. Invoice after invoice was not a proper, machine-generated PDF from a recognized platform like Facebook Ads Manager or Google Analytics. They were screenshots, JPEGs and PNGs, slightly blurry, with the telltale signs of a mobile phone capture. One invoice, for a 5-figure sum from Ascend Digital, even had a sliver of a battery life icon visible in the top right corner. This is the oldest trick in the book for hiding the source of funds. A screenshot can be edited, a data log cannot. It was an insult to the intelligence of anyone who might review them. It was a testament to her belief that no one would. I moved the entire folder into my evidence file. Exhibit C. Timestamp: Tuesday, 11:00 a.m. Source: Juniper and Slate. Instagram page. I cross-referenced the invoice from Cityscape Creative with a post on the Juniper and Slate feed. The invoice detailed a paid partnership with an influencer. A woman with 200,000 followers who had supposedly created a custom lifestyle shot featuring a Juniper and Slate coffee cup. The post was there, exactly as described. The image was beautiful. A woman's hand, adorned with delicate rings, holding the branded cup against a backdrop of autumnal leaves. I downloaded the image and ran a reverse image search. The result came back in 0.4 seconds. The photograph was from a popular stock photo website, uploaded 2 years prior. I then opened the image file's metadata. The EXIF data, which should contain information about the camera, the lens, the date the photo was taken, was completely blank. It had been scrubbed. The influencer hadn't created anything. She had simply downloaded a stock photo, perhaps photoshopped the logo onto the cup, and collected her fee. My company had paid for a lie, and Sloan had approved it. Exhibit D. Timestamp: Wednesday, 8:52 a.m. Source: company-wide email server. This piece of evidence was a gift, delivered by Sloan's own carelessness. An email alert popped into my inbox. I had set up a listening rule for her name on the server. It was a forwarded message chain. The original message was from Sloan to her direct manager. Subject: urgent. Invoice approval needed. Golden hour. Body: hey Mark, just resending this. AP is being slow. Can you please push this through before Friday? The vendor needs payment. You know the drill. My boss is super chill about approvals, so it should be fine. Thanks. S. The fatal error was in the forward. In her haste to chase the payment, she hadn't just forwarded it to her manager. She had accidentally included the general distribution list for the entire Breyer and Wren accounting department. Her casual admission of bypassing procedure, her description of her boss as super chill about approvals, was now a public record. A dozen replies immediately popped up in the thread, all variations of, "I don't think this was meant for me," and "please remove me from this chain." It was a small, public humiliation. For me, it was a written confession. I saved the entire email thread as a single file. Exhibit E. Timestamp: Wednesday, 1:30 p.m. Source: anonymous internal email. An email arrived from a Proton Mail address. An encrypted, untraceable source. The subject line was simply Juniper and Slate. The body of the email contained no text, only a single attachment, a CSV file named Influencer List Q3 CSV. I opened it. It was a spreadsheet containing the names and contact information for over 200 influencers used in recent campaigns. I scrolled down the email column. Dozens of them were from domains like Mailinator, Com, and other known disposable email providers. These weren't real partners, they were shells, created to receive payments and provide the illusion of a broad outreach network. Someone on Sloan's team knew what was happening. Someone was trying to protect themselves, or perhaps their conscience had finally outweighed their fear. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. This was no longer just about Sloan's arrogance. She was pulling junior employees into her orbit of fraud. Exhibit F. I decided it was time for a more direct approach. I asked Robert Sterling, the CEO, to set up a brief, informal check-in with Sloan. I was to be introduced as a consultant from Larkspur, there to help streamline budget reporting across the subsidiaries, a financial advisor, a numbers person. No one would question it. We met via video call that afternoon. Sloan appeared on the screen, her background artfully blurred, her makeup perfect. She was all smiles and professional charm. "Sloan, great to see you," Robert began. "I'd like you to meet Lark Rowan. Lark is a financial consultant with our parent company, and she's just helping us get a better handle on marketing ROI across the portfolio." "So lovely to meet you," Sloan chirped, her smile never faltering. "Anything I can do to help?" I kept my expression neutral, my voice flat. "Sloan, thank you for your time. Your team's top-line metrics are certainly impressive. I was hoping you could walk me through the data behind them. For example, do you have a recent brand lift study I could review? Or any attribution modeling that ties your campaigns directly to in-store sales?" There was a beat of silence. Her smile tightened by a millimeter. Brand lift studies and attribution modeling are standard, essential tools for any legitimate marketing department. They are the difference between claiming success and proving it. She let out a small, tinkling laugh. "Oh, wow. You're really getting into the weeds, aren't you?" she said, shaking her head as if I were a hopelessly nerdy academic. "We're more focused on the big picture here, building a vibe, a community, engagement. You can't really put a number on that, can you?" "You can, actually," I replied. That's precisely what brand lift studies are for. Right. Well, she said, her tone shifting from charming to dismissive. We're moving too fast to get bogged down in that kind of granular analysis. The numbers speak for themselves. 5 million impressions. I held her gaze for a moment through the screen. She believed it. She had repeated the lie so many times that it had become her truth. The only real thing in her entire department was the sheer, unshakable force of her own self-confidence. Thank you, Sloan. That was very illuminating, I said. The call ended a few minutes later. I saved a transcript of her answer. I titled the file Draft. That evening, I ran the banking information from the 3 suspicious vendor contracts through our firm's compliance software. The program cross-references routing numbers, addresses, and registered agents against a global database. At 10:47 p.m., the results came in. The 3 companies, Golden Hour Media, Ascend Digital, and Cityscape Creative, all with different mailing addresses, were a sham. The wire transfers from all 3 were routed to accounts at the same financial institution, a small, regional bank in Delaware. Not just the same bank, the same branch. That was the final piece, the kill shot. My last action of the night was to send a single, terse email to Robert Sterling and the CFO. Subject: Urgent. Expenditure. Freeze. J&S Marketing Body. Effective immediately. Place a temporary hold on all non-payroll expenditures for the Juniper and Slate social media department, pending a full budget and compliance review. Acknowledge receipt. The trap was now fully set. The evidence was compiled. The escape routes were closed, and the money had been stopped. The only thing left to do was to wait for the payroll system to present me with her name on Friday morning. The process itself would be the verdict. Friday morning arrived with the clinical precision of a scalpel. At precisely 9:00 a.m., I was in the main glass-walled conference room on the executive floor. It was a space designed for transparency and intimidation, offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. On the 80-inch screen at the head of the room, the consolidated payroll for Larkspur Holdings was displayed, a vast, intimidating spreadsheet with hundreds of rows, each representing a life, a salary, a direct deposit. The numbers glowed in the low light of the room, a river of capital waiting for a single command to flow. David Miller, our interim CFO, stood beside the screen, a laser pointer in his hand. He was a meticulous, cautious man in his late 50s, a professional who dealt in absolutes and abhorred ambiguity. He was aware of my expenditure freeze, but not the personal dynamics behind it. To him, this was a simple matter of procedural red flags. "Good morning," he began, his voice echoing slightly in the large, quiet room. "The payroll for this period is standard, with all subsidiaries reporting within expected parameters. Save for one minor area." He clicked a button, and the spreadsheet automatically scrolled down, highlighting a small cluster of rows in a pale yellow. "We have 3 employees in the Juniper and Slate social media department whose status is currently flagged as pending documentation review per the expenditure hold you initiated on Wednesday. Ms. Rowan," he used my legal pseudonym, his tone a model of professional discretion. He circled the 3 names with the red dot of his laser pointer. One of them was Sloan Ellison. I gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Thank you. David, I'm aware. The hold is intentional." He looked relieved to be absolved of responsibility. "Very good. Then, pending your approval on the main ledger, we are ready to execute the transfer." I picked up the tablet that was synced to the system. On the screen was the final authorization page, 2 buttons. Decline and approve. With my stylus, I drew my signature, Lark Rowan, in the digital box. It was a clean, sharp signature I had practiced until it was devoid of any personal flourish. Then, I tapped a small checkbox next to the main payroll ledger, a box that read, "Execute all except pending items." Finally, my stylus hovered for a moment over the large green Approve button. I pressed it. The on-screen button flashed, and a small line of text appeared below my signature. Approved. Friday, 9:02 a.m. Across the city, in hundreds of bank accounts, Direct deposits were being initiated, a quiet, digital cascade of funds, except for three. For those three, a different process was initiated. An automated, impersonal email was dispatched from the HR system. I knew its contents by heart, as I had reviewed the template myself. Subject: Action required. Payroll status. Update. Dear employee, this is an automated notification to inform you that your payroll for the current period has been placed on a temporary hold. This is a result of a pending review of departmental expenditures and vendor documentation. To resolve this, please immediately submit all unverified vendor contracts, proof of performance reports, and associated invoices for the previous quarter to the Internal Audit Department. Your payment will be processed upon successful verification. Thank you. HR and Payroll Systems Administrator. The message was a masterpiece of corporate ambiguity. It offered no personal contact, no one to argue with. It simply presented a problem and a procedural solution. It turned the target into the agent of their own resolution, forcing them to produce the very documents that would incriminate them. I closed my tablet and stood. Thank you, David. That will be all for now. Back in my office, I opened a monitoring window for the company's internal Slack. It took less than 5 minutes. A notification popped up in the Juniper Slate marketing channel. It was Sloan. Sloan Ellison. Did anyone else not get paid? My deposit usually hits by 9:15. A few replies trickled in. I got mine. Me too. Then, a message from one of the other 2 employees whose pay was on hold. I didn't get paid either. Sloan, I just got a weird automated email from HR. Sloan's next message was full of her signature. Dismissive confidence. Sloan Ellison. Ugh, typical. The system is probably bugged again. I swear our tech is from the Stone Age. Can someone at TAG-IT support? Tell them to fix the payroll glitch. The IT support account, monitored by a team of unflappable technicians, responded within 60 seconds. Their reply was public, posted for the entire channel to see. IT. Support. Hi, at Sloan Ellison. We have checked the payroll system logs. There are no errors or glitches detected. The notification you received was triggered intentionally by the system due to a hold placed by management pending documentation review. This is not a technical issue. Please follow the instructions in the email to resolve the hold. The silence in the channel was immediate and absolute. It had not just refuted her claim. They had publicly corrected her. They had taken her excuse and turned it into an indictment. She had tried to blame the machine, but the machine had just testified against her. I let another hour pass. I let the silence marinate. I imagined her sitting at her desk, the initial annoyance hardening into confusion, then into the cold beginnings of fear. She would be scrambling, trying to understand how a glitch had become a formal inquiry. At 11:00 a.m., I sent a calendar invitation from my Lark Rowan account. Subject: Urgent meeting. Juniper and Slate vendor documentation. Attendees: Sloan Ellison, Anna Kendrick, head of HR, Michael Reeve, head of internal audit, Lark Rowan. Time: 11:30 a.m. Location: Conference Room 4C. I chose Room 4C deliberately. It was one of our smallest internal meeting rooms. A small, soundproofed box with no external windows. The light was a flat, unforgiving white from recessed LED panels in the ceiling. The only sound was the quiet, persistent hum of the air conditioning unit. It was a room designed for difficult conversations, a space stripped of all comfort and distraction. It was the perfect stage for the truth. I arrived first, along with Anna from HR and Michael from Audit. They were both seasoned professionals who understood the gravity of such a summons. Michael placed a thin file folder on the polished white table. I placed my own tablet beside it. We sat in silence. A tribunal waiting for the accused. Sloan arrived at 11:31 a.m. She had tried to compose herself, but the mask of effortless confidence was cracked. Her makeup was perfect, her outfit impeccable, but her eyes darted around the room, taking in the attendees. She saw the head of HR and the head of internal audit, and a visible flicker of panic crossed her face. This was not a simple payroll issue. "Hi," she said, her voice a little too bright. "Sorry, I was just on a call. What's this about?" I did not stand or offer a greeting. I simply gestured to the empty chair across the table from me. "Please, have a seat. Sloan?" She sat, placing her designer handbag on the floor beside her. She looked at me, her expression a mixture of confusion and dawning recognition. She had seen my face on the video call, but meeting in person was different. I slid 3 documents from Michael's folder across the table. They were paper copies of the 3 vendor contracts: Golden Hour Media, Ascend Digital, and Cityscape Creative. I laid them out in a neat row in front of her. "I have a procedural question for you. Sloan," I began, my voice calm and level. It was the voice I used for depositions. "These are the contracts for your 3 newest marketing agencies. They were submitted for payment against your budget. My question is this." I leaned forward slightly, my gaze locked on hers. I tapped a finger on the signature line of the first contract, then the second, then the third. Why do 3 different companies, represented by 3 different individuals, all have a signature that is stylistically identical? She stared at the papers, the blood drained from her face. Her eyes flicked from the signatures up to my face and back down again. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She was cornered by an irrefutable, physical piece of evidence. The carefully constructed world of digital metrics and confident boasts had just collided with the unyielding reality of ink on paper. She stammered for a moment, a jumble of half-formed excuses. I don't know. Maybe it's a coincidence. The agencies, they work together sometimes. Maybe." Her voice trailed off. She knew how weak it sounded. And then, as if a switch had been flipped, the fear in her eyes was replaced by a flash of defiance. It was the last, desperate defense of a cornered animal. Aggression. She straightened up in her chair. Her chin lifted. She looked directly at me, her expression hardening into a sneer of contempt. "I don't know what this is," she said, her voice dripping with scorn. "But I don't answer to some random financial consultant. Who the hell are you to be asking me these questions, anyway?" Sloane's question hung in the sterile air of the conference room, a final, futile spark of defiance. "Who the hell are you to be asking me these questions, anyway?" I did not raise my voice. I did not change my expression. I simply reached into the inside pocket of my blazer and retrieved my company identification. It was a simple, matte black card, unadorned with logos or bright colors. I placed it on the white table and slid it across the polished surface. It came to a stop directly in front of her. The movement was silent, but it carried the weight of a gavel strike. She glanced down. Her eyes, accustomed to scanning for brand names and social cues, took a moment to process the simple, sans-serif text. "Mara Ellison," I said, my voice as flat and cool as the card itself. "Managing member, Larkspur Holdings." The name of the parent company, the one she had seen on the bottom of the Brunch receipt and dismissed as irrelevant, was now attached to the sister she had derided her entire life. The 3 words landed in the quiet room with the force of a physical blow. Sloane's sneer dissolved. Her bravado evaporated, replaced by a wave of cold, stark disbelief. Her gaze darted from the ID card to my face, as if trying to reconcile 2 completely incompatible realities. As if on a silent signal, the other occupants of the room moved. Anna Kendrick, the head of HR, turned her chair slightly, her posture shifting from that of a neutral observer to an active participant in a disciplinary hearing. Her eyes on Sloane were no longer curious, but clinical and assessing. Michael Reeve, from Internal Audit, swiveled his laptop on the table to face Sloane directly. He clicked his mouse once. The screen, which had been dark, lit up with a single, devastatingly simple slide. It was a flowchart, 3 boxes at the top, labeled Golden Hour Media, Ascend Digital, and Cityscape Creative. All had arrows pointing downwards. Those arrows converged on a single, larger box. This box was labeled with a routing number and the name of a regional bank in Delaware. From that box, a final, Bold red arrow pointed to a box at the bottom, which contained a single account number, 3 vendors, 1 bank, 1 account. As the managing member of the holding company, I continued, my tone unchanged. I am, by necessity, a signatory on certain key financial instruments. The board of directors delegates final authorization for the consolidated company payroll to my office for audit and approval. I paused, letting the words sink in. Every month, a spreadsheet with every employee's name and salary is placed before me. My signature is on the final line. It is the action that allows the bank to release the funds. My signature is the reason you have been getting paid for the last year. Sloane shook her head. A tiny, almost imperceptible movement. A whisper escaped her lips, so quiet I could barely hear it. I thought you were just an accountant. The condescension that had dripped from that word just days ago was gone, replaced by the hollow sound of a worldview collapsing. An accountant. Someone who just counts the money. She had never once considered who owned it. That was your mistake, I stated, not as an accusation, but as a fact. But your larger mistake was a failure to follow basic corporate policy. I gestured to Anna, who understood immediately. Sloane, Anna said, her voice formal and practiced. Every employee signs the Breyer and Wren Code of Conduct upon hiring. Section 7, subsection C, pertains to conflicts of interest. It requires all employees to formally disclose any personal or familial relationships with other employees or managing members of the company or its parent entities. It's a standard clause. We have no record of any such disclosure from you. Sloane stared at her, speechless. The fraud was a crime of commission. This was a crime of omission. One was an act of theft, the other, an act of deceit. Both were grounds for immediate termination. I leaned back in my chair. You see, the identical signatures on the contracts were what initiated the audit, but the undeclared conflict of interest is what makes it a far more serious issue. You actively concealed our relationship. Michael clicked his mouse again. The money flow chart vanished, replaced by a high-resolution photograph on the screen. It was a picture of the bill from our brunch at the Wisteria. My corporate card was visible, my name clearly printed on it, and at the bottom of the receipt, the text was now magnified. Impossible to miss. The Wisteria, a Breyer and Wren hospitality group property, a Larkspur Holdings company. The sterile conference room was suddenly filled with the ghost of that sun-drenched brunch, the clinking of glasses, the scent of expensive perfume, the sound of my sister's mocking laughter. I let her look at the image for a long moment before I spoke. I delivered each sentence slowly, a series of precise, verbal hammer blows. On Sunday, you sat in a restaurant that my company owns. You ordered the most expensive items on the menu, expecting me to pay. You mocked my shoes and my profession, and you did all of this while you were actively funneling my company's money into a fraudulent enterprise of your own creation. The finality of the statement hung in the air. Sloane's face, which had been pale, was now ashen. Her last defense mechanism kicked in. The desperate, reflexive deployment of charm, she forced a brittle, unconvincing smile. Mara, Lark, listen, she stammered, her voice trembling slightly. This is all just a huge misunderstanding, a small mistake. The bookkeeping got a little messy, that's all. I can fix it. A small mistake. The words were so inadequate, so fundamentally disconnected from the reality of the situation, that they were almost absurd. In response, I gave a slight nod to Michael. He reached into his file folder and pulled out a single, plain manila envelope. He did not open it. He simply placed it on the table in front of Sloane, next to the 3 fraudulent contracts. It was the final exhibit. That is not a mistake. Sloane, I said. That is intent. She looked down at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. Our audit was very thorough, Michael said, his voice a dry monotone. That envelope contains a copy of the Articles of Incorporation for a Delaware-based LLC called S.E. Creative Consulting. It also contains a bank statement for that LLC from last month. The same bank, the same account number that the funds from Golden Hour. Ascend Digital and Cityscape Creative were all wired to, he paused. According to the state of Delaware, the sole proprietor and registered agent of that LLC is listed as Sloan Ellison. Checkmate. There was nowhere left for her to run, no excuse to make, no one else to blame. Her shell company, her bank account, her name. The line connecting her deception to her wallet was now a bright, undeniable scar across the table. The room fell into a profound silence. The only sound was the quiet, rhythmic hum of the air conditioner, a sound that suddenly seemed deafening. Sloane stared at the envelope, her forced smile frozen on her face, a grotesque mask of denial. Then, another sound entered the stillness, a soft, scratching noise. It was Anna Kendrick. She had taken a pen from her portfolio and was uncapping it. She turned to a new page in the notepad in front of her. A page I could see was a pre-printed disciplinary action form. The sound was the quiet, methodical scrape of her pen as she filled in the date, the time, and Sloane's name. The conversation was over. The process had begun. The scratch of Anna Kendrick's pen filling out the disciplinary form was the only sound in the room. It was the sound of a process in motion, a bureaucratic machine that, once started, was very difficult to stop. I let the sound hang in the air for a full 10 seconds before I spoke, breaking the silence and, in doing so, taking complete control of the proceedings. There are two paths forward from this moment. Sloane, I said. My voice was devoid of anger or triumph. It was the voice I used to outline the terms of a deal. I want you to listen very carefully and understand both of them before you say another word. Sloane looked up, her eyes wide with a desperate, pleading fear. She was no longer a corporate performer. She was a child, waiting to be told the scale of her punishment. Path A is the official one, I continued, holding up one finger. Under this path, you are suspended effective immediately, pending a formal internal investigation. Given the evidence we have already collected, that investigation will almost certainly result in your termination for cause, specifically for gross misconduct and violation of the company's code of conduct. We would then be legally and fiscally obligated to pursue all available avenues to recover the misappropriated funds. This would likely involve civil litigation. It is a loud, expensive, and public process, and the outcome would be a permanent, documented record of fraud attached to your professional history. I paused, letting the weight of that future settle on her. The public humiliation, the lawyers, the stain that would follow her for the rest of her career. Then there is Path B, I said, holding up a second finger. Path B is a private one. It is an agreement. It involves your immediate and voluntary resignation, effective today. It is contingent upon your full cooperation and the complete restitution of all funds paid to Samo Creative Consulting and its associated vendors. This path is quiet. It is contained. It allows the company to resolve the matter internally and without further incident. It allows you to walk away from this without a public legal battle. I leaned back, my hands resting flat on the table. The choice of which path we take is entirely yours. You have 5 minutes to decide. Anna Kendrick, without a word, slid a neatly stapled document from her portfolio and placed it in the center of the table. The title on the cover page was stark and unambiguous. Separation and Release Agreement. Should you choose Path B? Anna said, her tone perfectly neutral. This document outlines the terms. It includes a standard non-disclosure agreement, a waiver of claims against the company, and a detailed schedule for the restitution of funds. Sloane stared at the document as if it were an unexploded bomb. Her hands were trembling in her lap. She was trapped, and the document in front of her was the only available exit, a door that came with a very high price. I watched her for a moment, then added my own term. There is one additional condition to Path B, I said. Michael and Anna both looked at me. This was not something we had discussed. I am adding a non-compete and non-solicitation addendum. For a period of 18 months following your signature, you will be barred from engaging in any professional capacity related to media buying, influencer marketing, or third-party vendor management within the food and beverage industry. It is a non-negotiable clause. This wasn't about punishment. It was about risk mitigation. I was cauterizing a wound, not just for my company, but for the local market. I would not allow her to take this fraudulent business model to one of my competitors. Sloane finally found her voice. It was small and fragile. She looked from the terrifying legal document up to my face, her mind grappling with the totality of her collapse. Her focus narrowed to the most immediate, pressing concern of a person whose life has just been dismantled. "My salary," she whispered, her voice cracking. "My paycheck for this month. What about that?" It was a pathetic question, but a human one. Even in the midst of a catastrophe, the rent is still due. "That payroll, for you, will not be approved," I said, the statement a simple, undeniable fact. "You have forfeited your compensation for this period through your actions. That money is now part of the sum that must be repaid to the company." I took out my pen, a simple, heavy fountain pen, and held it over the space on the table next to the agreement. "I will not be signing the document that pays you for your work here, but if you choose Path B, I am prepared to sign a different document." I reached into my bag and took out a checkbook. Not a corporate one, but my own personal one. It was navy blue leather, with my name, Mara Ellison, embossed in small silver letters. I opened it and placed it on the table. "The restitution amount is significant," I said calmly. "You will need to terminate your vendor contracts and return the initial deposits. There will be legal fees to dissolve your shell company. You do not have the liquidity to manage that. I know you don't." I was stating a fact, not a judgment. "So this is my offer. You sign the separation agreement, here and now. In return, I will write you a personal check. It will not be a gift. It is an advance. It is a mechanism to ensure your compliance with the restitution schedule. The funds will be sufficient to cover your immediate legal obligations and the initial vendor repayments. The remainder you will owe the company will be paid in installments, as outlined in the agreement." Her eyes widened. She was being offered a lifeline, but the hand extending it was the same one that had dismantled her world. The sheer, cold practicality of the offer was, perhaps, more shocking than any emotional outburst would have been. She looked at me, her mind reeling, searching for some angle, some familiar dynamic to grab onto. She found the only one she had left. "Mom," she said, her voice breaking completely now. "Mom is going to be so disappointed in you, Mara." It was her last resort, an appeal to family, to sisterhood, an attempt to reframe me as the villain, the cruel older sister tearing down her sibling. I did not flinch. My expression remained unchanged. I met her tear-filled gaze and held it. "Our mother taught us the value of honesty." "Sloane," I replied, my voice steady and clear. "She taught us that the truth matters. I am honoring that lesson today by insisting on it. The person who should disappoint her is the one who lied, who stole, and who built a career on a foundation of deceit. I am simply the one presenting the bill." My words hung in the air. A final, unassailable verdict. I had taken her last weapon and turned it into a justification for my own actions. I glanced at the clock on the wall. The second hand swept upwards. It was 11:59 and 50 seconds. "The payroll transfer for the entire company is finalized at noon," I said. "After that, the process becomes infinitely more complicated. It is time to choose your path." The second hand hit the 12 p.m., the deadline. The hum of the air conditioner seemed to swell in the silence. Sloane looked down at the separation agreement. Her shoulders slumped in a gesture of utter defeat. With a shaking hand, she reached for the pen Anna had left on the table. She uncapped it, her movement slow and shaky, and pulled the document towards her. She signed her name on the final page. The signature was a jagged, broken version of her usual confident scrawl. She pushed the document back to the center of the table. I gave a slight nod. I picked up my own pen, wrote out the check to her name for the agreed-upon amount, and signed it. Mara Ellison. My signature was firm and steady. I tore the check from the book and slid it across the table to her. Then, I picked up my tablet, unlocked the screen, and navigated back to the payroll authorization page. I tapped the box next to the 2 remaining names on the pending list, the junior employees who had been caught in Sloane's wake. A small checkmark appeared. Then I pressed the large green button. Approve pending items. The transaction was complete. The company was moving on. The moment Sloane's signature dried on the separation agreement, a silent, pre-planned cascade of actions was triggered across the company. My involvement was over. The system I had built was now executing the consequences. The process was swift, impersonal, and brutally efficient. Timestamp, 12:05 p.m. Source, HR Communications Server. An email is dispatched to the company-wide distribution list. The sender is Breyer and Wren Corporate Announcements. The subject line is neutral, designed to convey information without inviting speculation. Subject, Organizational Update. To all employees, this memo is to inform you of a personnel change, effective immediately. Sloane Ellison, social media lead for Juniper and Slate, is no longer with the company. We wish her the best in her future endeavors. We will be restructuring the social media team's objectives in the coming days and will provide an update on departmental leadership shortly. Please direct any immediate operational questions to the interim department head, Mark Stenson. Thank you. Breyer and Wren, Human Resources. The email was a masterpiece of corporate non-speak. No longer with the company is a void into which employees can pour their own rumors. Future endeavors is a polite fiction. The entire message was designed to be a closed door, not an invitation to a conversation. Timestamp, 12:07 p.m. Source, internal Slack channel. Juniper Slate Marketing. The email, as intended, acted as a detonator. The marketing channel, which had been silent for the past hour, exploded. Junior designer. Whoa, did anyone just see that email about Sloane? Copywriter. Yeah. No longer with the company. That was fast. She was literally just posting about the campaign this morning. Junior analyst. I knew something was up. Her pay was on hold. She was called into a meeting on the exec floor an hour ago. Copywriter. With who? Junior analyst. HR and audit, I think, and some consultant from corporate. The digital rumor mill was spinning up to full speed. Before it could spiral out of control with speculation and misinformation, a new message appeared, this one from Anna Kendrick. Her posts were rare in departmental channels and carried the institutional weight of her position. Anna Kendrick, HR. A reminder to all employees. Per Section 4, Subsection D of the Employee Handbook, speculating on the circumstances of a colleague's departure is considered unprofessional conduct. Please respect the privacy of all parties involved and focus on your work. The company will not be providing any further details on this personnel matter. Thank you for your cooperation. The message was a bucket of ice water on the conversation. The channel went silent immediately. The policy had been cited, the line drawn. The system was enforcing its own code of silence. Timestamp 12:15 p.m. Source, IT and Asset Management Ticketing System. A series of automated tickets are generated. Ticket 77431. Offboarding. Sloane Ellison. Action item. Deactivate all network, email, and building access credentials. Effective time, 1400. Assigned to IT security. Ticket 77432. Asset recovery. Sloane Ellison. Action item. Schedule and execute retrieval of all company property, including laptop, mobile phone, and access badge. Deadline, 1400. Assigned to internal audit. Michael Reeve, from his desk, sends a calendar invitation to Sloane's now doomed corporate email address. The subject is equipment return. The location is the front lobby. The time is 2:00 p.m. It is not a request. It is a summons. The process of erasing her from the corporate infrastructure had begun. Timestamp, 1:30 p.m. Source, Legal Department, Secure Server. My company's general counsel, having been briefed by me and Anna Kendrick, completes a draft of a voluntary disclosure form for the IRS. The company's position was clear. We had been the victims of vendor fraud perpetrated by an employee. By self-reporting the issue and documenting the restitution plan, we were preemptively cleaning our own books and protecting the corporation from any potential tax liability stemming from the fraudulent invoices. It was a standard, pragmatic move. It also had the secondary effect of creating a formal government record of the incident, a quiet but permanent consequence that would exist long after the separation agreement was filed away. Timestamp: 1:45 p.m. Source: Accounts Payable. Email server: the AP Department, following the protocol of the separation agreement, sends formal notices of contract termination to Golden Hour Media, Ascend Digital, and Cityscape Creative. The notices are sent to the email addresses listed on the invoices. Within minutes, the server logs 3 identical, automated replies. Delivery has failed to these recipients or groups. Contact at Golden Hour Media. The recipient's email address couldn't be found. The shell companies, having served their purpose, had already vanished into the digital ether. The email accounts had been deleted. There was no one on the other end to receive the notification. They had simply ceased to exist. Timestamp: 2:30 p.m. Source: my personal mobile phone. A call comes in from a number I recognize. It is Robert Sterling, the CEO. I answer using my professional, slightly distant Lark Rowan voice. "Lark," he says, his tone serious. "I've been brought up to speed by Anna and Michael. I just wanted to call you directly." "Robert," I reply, "everything is under control." "I have no doubt," he says. "Listen, this is an unfortunate situation, but I want to thank you. You identified a vulnerability. You handled it with discretion, and you protected the company's assets. It was a difficult but necessary lesson for us. Your commitment to fiscal integrity is deeply appreciated." It was the perfect corporate expression of gratitude. He wasn't thanking me for firing my sister. He was thanking me for upholding a principle. The personal element was neatly excised. "It's my job to protect the investment, Robert," I said. "The system worked as designed. Let's focus on strengthening the team's analytical capabilities moving forward." "Agreed," he said. "Consider it done." The call lasted less than 2 minutes. Timestamp: 3:00 p.m. Source: HR Calendar. Anna Kendrick sends a mandatory meeting invitation to the 3 remaining members of the Juniper and Slate social media team. The subject is Departmental Restructuring and Q4 Goal Alignment. The meeting is for the following morning. The agenda is clear: to reset, to pivot, to surgically remove Sloan's entire operational philosophy from the team's DNA. Anna would talk about a new focus on data-driven strategy. She would emphasize ROI, attribution modeling, and brand lift studies. She would, in essence, be introducing my philosophy of management without ever mentioning my name. The era of vanity metrics at Juniper and Slate was officially over. Timestamp: 3:15 p.m. Source: Larkspur Holdings. Budgetary Approval System. Following my call with Robert, a new budget proposal is routed to my queue for approval. It is a request from HR for an emergency allocation. The line item reads, "Advanced Data Analytics and ROI Modeling Training for Breyer and Wren Marketing Personnel." I opened the proposal. It was a comprehensive course from a top-tier university designed to teach marketers how to prove their value with hard numbers. It was the exact opposite of Sloan's entire methodology. I clicked the Approve button without hesitation. This was the constructive final act of the affair, investing in the competence that would prevent this from happening again. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of my usual work. I analyzed other investments, took other calls, and moved on. The system was completing its tasks. The consequences were unfolding without any further input from me. Then, at 5:47 p.m., my personal email inbox lit up with a new message. It was from Sloan's private account. My finger hovered over the delete button, but I opened it out of a detached sense of curiosity. The body of the email was completely empty. There was no text, no sign-off, not even a punctuation mark. There was only the subject line, a single, stark admission hanging in the digital void. Subject: I'm sorry. I stared at the two words. I considered the vast gulf between her actions and this meager, last-ditch attempt at an apology. It was a gesture born of defeat, not remorse. It cost her nothing. It meant nothing. I did not reply. I did not archive the message. I simply closed the window. An apology, in my world, is an unverified claim. It's a projection, a hope, an intangible. The only apology I would accept would not arrive in the form of an email. It would arrive as a notification from my bank, confirming the receipt of an electronic funds transfer. Until then, her words were just noise. The only language that mattered now was the one spoken by the numbers on a balance sheet. Sunday dinner at my mother's house was a long-standing ritual, a weekly performance of familial harmony. The dining room table was always set with her best china, the silverware polished to a soft gleam. That evening, the scene was no different. A roasted chicken sat in the center of the table, its skin a perfect, crisp brown. My mother moved around it with a practiced, gentle fussiness, lighting the two tall candles in their silver holders. The flames flickered to life, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls and lending a warm, forgiving glow to the room. It was an illusion of warmth, a carefully curated atmosphere of peace that felt more fragile than ever. We took our seats, me, my mother, and Sloane. It was the first time I had seen my sister since the meeting in conference room 4C. She was a ghost of her former self. The vibrant, performative confidence was gone, replaced by a brittle, guarded quiet. She wore a simple gray sweater, a color she would have once derided as drab, and she kept her eyes fixed on her plate, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. My mother, for her part, was trying to weave a tapestry of normalcy over the gaping silence. She spoke about her piano students, about a neighbor's new puppy, about the weather. Her monologue was a nervous, fluttering thing, a bird trying to fly in a vacuum. Sloane and I offered only non-committal murmurs in response. The silence between her sentences grew longer, heavier. Finally, she could bear it no longer. She turned to Sloane, her voice deliberately light and casual, a tone that betrayed the effort behind it. "So, Sloane, honey," she began, carving a slice of white meat from the chicken. "How are things at work? Any exciting new campaigns you're working on?" The question dropped into the quiet room like a stone. I continued to cut a piece of carrot on my plate, the knife making a soft, grating sound against the ceramic. Sloane flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of her shoulders. She did not look up. "I'm changing my career path," she said, her voice low and muffled. "I'm exploring some new directions." She still refused to meet my gaze, her eyes locked on the pattern of her fork. "Oh?" my mother said, her cheerfulness beginning to fray. "That's sudden. Is everything all right?" Before Sloane could formulate another vague, evasive answer, I acted. My movement was slow, deliberate, and silent. I reached for the plain white envelope that was resting on my lap. I placed it on the dark wood of the table, directly in front of Sloane's plate. It lay there between us, a stark white rectangle in the warm candlelight, an object that did not belong in this performance of domestic peace. The conversation stopped. The sound of chewing stopped. Even the air seemed to still. Sloane stared at the envelope, her face paling. She knew what it was. My mother looked from the envelope to me, then to Sloane, her expression a mask of confusion. "What is this, Mara?" my mother asked, her voice tight with apprehension. I did not answer her. I looked at Sloane. "Go on," I said softly. "Open it." With a trembling hand, Sloane reached out and picked up the envelope. Her fingers fumbled with the flap. She pulled out the single sheet of paper inside and unfolded it. It was a copy of her pay stub from the previous month. It showed her salary, her deductions, her year-to-date earnings, and in the bottom right corner, In the box marked Authorized Signatory was a clean, digital reproduction of a signature, Lark Rowan. She stared at it, her breath catching in her throat. My mother, unable to contain her anxiety, got up from her chair and walked around the table to stand behind Sloane, peering over her shoulder. She read the document, her lips moving silently. Her eyes scanned the numbers, then settled on the signature box at the bottom. She looked at the name, then looked at me. Her face a canvas of dawning, horrified comprehension. "Mara?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her hand went to her throat. You're the one who signs this?" The question was not an accusation. It was a plea for a different reality, a last hope that she had misunderstood. I met my mother's gaze directly, my expression calm. I gave a single, slow nod. "I'm the same Mara I've always been. Mom," I said, my voice even. "I just work more thoroughly than you realized." The simple statement reordered their world. My years of quiet study, my long hours, my seriousness. It was not a lack of sparkle. It was the construction of an empire they had never bothered to see. Sloane's head snapped up. Her lips were pressed into a thin white line. For a fleeting second, I saw the old fire in her eyes, a reflexive urge to lash out, to deny, to create a scene, but there was nothing to deny. The proof was in her hands, a simple, bureaucratic document that was more powerful than any lie she could ever tell. The fire died, and she slumped back in her chair, utterly defeated. She folded the paper with shaky hands and placed it back on the table. My mother looked from one daughter to the other, her face etched with a pain I had not seen since my father's funeral. She looked at me, her expression pleading, asking for an explanation that would somehow make this less terrible. I gave it to her, but it was not the one she wanted. "No one loses their job over a single mistake, Mom," I said, my voice softening slightly, but losing none of its resolve. "People lose their jobs for the culture of deception they build to cover up that mistake. They lose it for the lies that follow." It was the truth, stated as plainly as possible. This was not a story of sibling rivalry. It was a story about integrity, a business principle that, for me, had become a life principle. My mother stared at me for a long moment. The candles flickered between us. I could see the battle in her eyes, the lifetime of favoring her star warring with the undeniable, harsh reality I had just placed on her dining room table. Finally, she gave a slow, tired nod of concession. She had been the audience to Sloane's long performance, and the play had finally, disastrously, ended. She leaned over the table, her movements heavy with a new kind of weariness, and blew out the candles, one by one. The flames vanished, plunging the room into the dim gray light of the evening. A thin, pale wisp of smoke curled up from each wick and then disappeared, a silent, final punctuation mark on our family's longest-held fiction. The dinner was over. I stood up and picked up the folded pay stub from the table, tucking it back into its envelope. The evidence had been presented. It no longer needed to be displayed, but as I turned to leave, I placed another piece of paper on the table in its place. It was a simple, printed list. Sloane and my mother both looked at it. The title at the top read, Larkspur Holdings, Professional Development Program, Q4 Course Offerings. Below it was a list of company-sponsored online classes. Introduction to Data Analytics, Fundamentals of Financial Accounting, Ethical Marketing Strategies, Project Management Basics. It was not an olive branch. It was a lifeline, a cold, practical, and completely impersonal one. It was an offer not of forgiveness, but of a path to redemption built on competence instead of charisma. It was available to anyone, including Sloane, if she ever decided she wanted to learn how to build something real, from the ground up, the right way. I didn't say another word. There was nothing left to say. I turned and walked out of the dining room, the soft click of the closing door sounding the end of the chapter. Monday morning. The light that filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office was cool and pale, the color of a new beginning. The weekend had passed in a quiet, orderly fashion. There had been no frantic calls from my mother, no desperate emails from Sloan. The system had absorbed the event, and the silence that followed was the sound of a problem being efficiently and permanently solved. I sat at my desk, a large, uncluttered expanse of dark walnut. My laptop was open. On the screen was the familiar interface of the Larkspur Holdings financial management portal. A new notification badge glowed with a quiet insistence. It was for the bi-weekly, off-cycle payroll run, for new hires, corrected hours, and any other adjustments that fell outside the main monthly transfer. It was a routine, minor administrative task. But today, it felt different. It felt like a ceremony. I clicked the notification. The page loaded, displaying a spreadsheet far smaller than the one from Friday. A handful of names, a handful of figures. At the bottom of the page was the digital authorization box, the same one I had used to approve the funds that had ended my sister's career. Next to the empty field labeled Authorized Signatory, a small black cursor blinked. Blink, blink, blink. It was a patient, rhythmic pulse, a digital heartbeat in the quiet of the morning. Each pulse seemed to mark a moment, a tiny space between what was and what would be. In that blinking cursor, I saw the culmination of years of quiet work, of being underestimated, of turning insults into assets. I saw the dismissal in my mother's eyes, the casual cruelty in my sister's laugh, the sensible shoes she had mocked. All of it had led to this screen, to this quiet exercise of an authority she never knew I possessed. I picked up the stylus. It was cool and heavy in my hand. I thought of Sloane's signature on the separation agreement, jagged and broken, the signature of a person whose world had been shattered. I thought of the 3 identical, fraudulent signatures on the vendor contracts, the signatures of a person who believed she was clever enough to fool the world. My own signature was neither of those things. It was a tool, an instrument of finality. I moved the stylus to the screen. The cursor vanished as the digital ink began to flow. I wrote the name, Lark Rowan. The letters were clean, precise, and unwavering. They were the symbol of the person I had built to protect the work I was doing. When I lifted the stylus, the signature solidified. Locking into place, I moved the tip of the stylus to the green button marked Approve. I pressed it. The screen flashed for a fraction of a second, and the page reloaded. In place of the button, a single word appeared in bold green text, accompanied by a timestamp. Approved. It was done. The cycle was complete. But I wasn't finished. There was one final entry to make. I navigated to the internal memo field associated with the transaction, a small, optional box for accounting notes. Most of the time, it was left blank. Today, I had a specific message to record. It was not for the accountants or the auditors. It was for the record. It was the first line item in a new corporate philosophy. I typed a single sentence, the clicks of the keys sharp and distinct in the quiet room. Integrity is the budget we never cut. I hit enter. The note was saved, attached permanently to the transaction log, a quiet declaration of principle embedded in the financial DNA of the company. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly. The act had not been cathartic in the way a loud, emotional confrontation might have been. It was something deeper. It was the quiet, profound satisfaction of a complex equation being solved, of a system functioning exactly as it was designed. At that moment, my phone, which lay face down on the desk, vibrated. The sound was a low, insistent buzz against the wood. I turned it over. A text message had appeared on the lock screen. It was not from my mother or my sister. The sender was a name I recognized. Maria, the general manager of the Juniper and Slate flagship store downtown, one of our best and most experienced operators. I opened the message. Morning, Ms. Rowan. Just wanted to share some early numbers. Since we killed the paid influencer promos on Friday and switched to the in-store customer loyalty campaign, weekend foot traffic is up 8%, and actual in-store sales are up 12% over the previous weekend. We're selling coffee, not just impressions. It's real. Thought you'd want to know. I read the message twice. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. 12%, real customers, spending real money, not bots, not click farms, not phantom numbers on a fabricated report. It was the first tangible proof that the truth was not just a moral imperative, it was a better business strategy. Honesty had a higher ROI than deceit. I set the phone back down. The final piece of the equation had just clicked into place. The circle was now closed. I closed the lid of my laptop. The screen went dark, the glowing numbers and approved transactions disappearing into the blackness. The work of that chapter was finished. I stood up, the chair rolling back silently on the thick carpet. As I walked towards the window, the sound of my shoes on the polished hardwood floor of my office was a soft, steady rhythm. My loafers, the sensible, comfortable, well-made shoes my sister had found so amusing. They were the shoes of a woman who had places to go, things to build. They were the shoes of the owner. I looked out the window, down at the city spread out below me. The morning sun was bright now, glinting off the windows of the surrounding skyscrapers. My gaze fell upon the street below, where I could just make out the corner of a building with a familiar green and white sign, Juniper and Slate. A subsidiary of Breyer and Wren, a Larkspur Holdings company. The sunlight hit the sign directly, illuminating the clean, simple font. It was bright, sharp, and clear. There was no filter on it. It didn't need one. I did not stand there and savor the victory. I did not replay the events in my mind. The past was a closed ledger, audited and reconciled. My focus, as always, was on the next transaction, the next opportunity, the next line item. I turned away from the window and walked towards the door of my office. I did not look back. There was no need for a public announcement, no grand declaration. The applause I cared about was not the sound of human hands, but the quiet, satisfying click of a system working, of a plan coming to fruition, of real numbers appearing on a real balance sheet. The signature was the story, and the story was now over. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And to help this story reach even more listeners, please support us by hitting the hype button. It truly makes a difference.